My name is Ethan, and for the better part of the last decade, I've been the reliable one in my family. The steady ship in a sea of, well, let's just say less than steady vessels. My parents, bless their hearts, have always struggled financially. My older brother, Liam, is charming but perpetually unlucky with jobs, and my younger sister, Chloe, is an aspiring artist whose aspirations rarely translate into actual income. So, naturally, when things got tight, and they often did, they turned to me. It wasn't something I resented, not exactly. Family is family, right? And I was fortunate enough to have a stable career as a software engineer. I earned a decent living, and helping out gave me a sense of purpose, a feeling that I was contributing in a meaningful way. My parents lived in a small town a couple of hours away, in the house I grew up in. Liam bounced between odd jobs and couch surfing, often ending up back with mom and dad. Chloe lived in a trendy part of the city, working part-time at a coffee shop while pursuing her artistic dreams, which mostly seemed to involve elaborate social media posts and the occasional craft fair. The requests started small. A few $100s here and there for a car repair, a medical bill, or just to tide them over until the next paycheck. Over time, however, the small requests became more frequent and the amounts larger. I didn't keep a meticulous tally, but I knew I was sending a significant chunk of my salary their way each month. I never complained, at least not openly. I figured it was my responsibility, my way of giving back to the people who had raised me. Things took a turn about 2 years ago when Liam lost his latest job. Something about a disagreement with his boss that ended with him mutually agreeing to part ways, as he put it. He moved back in with my parents, and the financial strain on them increased considerably. That's when the calls from my mom became more frequent, her voice laced with worry. "Ethan, honey, could you maybe send a little extra this month? Liam's looking for work, but you know how it is." I always said yes. How could I not? They were my family. Then there was Chloe. Her artistic endeavors, while admirable, weren't exactly paying the bills. She had a knack for finding unique and expensive materials for her projects, and those costs inevitably trickled down to me. "Ethan, I have this incredible vision for my next piece, but I'm a little short on funds for the supplies." Her voice was always so sweet and persuasive, and I always found myself reaching for my wallet. My own life, meanwhile, was comfortable but not extravagant. I lived in a modest apartment, drove an older car, and rarely splurged on myself. My savings account wasn't exactly overflowing, but I told myself it was okay. My family needed me. A few weeks ago, I decided to take a long weekend and visit my parents. I hadn't seen them in a while, and I was starting to feel a bit disconnected. I also wanted to check in on Liam, see how his job search was going. The drive down was pleasant enough, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the fields. When I arrived, Mom greeted me with a big hug and a home-cooked meal, just like old times. Dad was his usual quiet self, but I could tell he was happy to see me. Liam was there too, sprawled on the couch, flipping through channels on the TV. "Hey, Ethan," he said, not bothering to get up. "Long time no see." "Yeah, Liam," I replied, a little surprised by his lack of enthusiasm. "How's the job hunt going?" He shrugged. "It's tough out there, man. Nothing decent has come up yet." We had a fairly typical family dinner, filled with small talk and the usual updates. Mom mentioned some local gossip, Dad talked about his garden, and Liam complained about the lack of good shows on television. I asked about Chloe, and Mom said she was doing well, busy with her art. The next day, I offered to help Dad with some chores around the house. We spent the morning fixing a leaky faucet and tidying up the yard. It was during a break, while we were sitting on the porch drinking iced tea, that Dad said something that stuck with me. "You're a good son, Ethan," he said, looking out at the garden. "We appreciate everything you do for us." "Of course, Dad," I replied. "You're my family." Later that afternoon, Mom asked if I could take a look at her laptop. It had been running slow, and she suspected it had a virus. I spent a couple of hours cleaning it up, installing some antivirus software, and showing her how to use it. While I was working on it, a notification popped up from her email account. It was an email from Chloe. The subject line caught my eye. "Weekend getaway." Curiosity piqued, I instinctively clicked on it. The email was addressed to both my parents and Liam. It was an itinerary for a weekend trip to a resort town a few hours away. The email detailed a stay at a fancy hotel, reservations at upscale restaurants, and even tickets for a couple of shows. The dates for the trip were for the upcoming weekend, the same weekend I had planned to be home. My heart sank a little. Why hadn't anyone mentioned this to me? I scrolled through the email, my eyes widening at the estimated cost of the trip. It was a significant amount of money, easily a few $1,000s. And then I saw it, a sentence at the bottom of the email. Mom, Dad, and Liam, I've taken care of the initial booking with my credit card. Ethan said he'd cover the rest when I see him next. My blood ran cold. Ethan said he'd cover the rest? When had I said that? Chloe hadn't even spoken to me about this trip. I closed the laptop, my mind reeling. I felt a knot of anger tightening in my stomach. Had they really just assumed I would foot the bill for their lavish vacation without even consulting me? I tried to play it cool, not wanting to cause a scene. I finished working on the laptop and handed it back to Mom. All set, I said, trying to keep my voice even. Later that evening, after dinner, I found Mom and Dad in the living room. Liam was out with some friends. I decided to bring up the email, trying to sound casual. Hey Mom, I saw an email from Chloe about a weekend trip, I said. Looks like fun. Mom smiled. Oh yes, Chloe organized it. We're all really looking forward to it. That's great, I said. She mentioned something about me helping out with the costs? Mom's smile faltered slightly. She exchanged a quick glance with Dad. Well, yes, honey. You know how things are. No, Mom, I don't know how things are, I said, my voice starting to rise. Chloe didn't even talk to me about this. She just assumed I would pay for it. Dad cleared his throat. Now, Ethan, don't get upset. We were going to talk to you about it. When? I asked. After you had already gone on the trip and racked up a huge bill? Chloe said you wouldn't mind. Mom interjected, her tone defensive. She said you always help us out. That's because I choose to help out, Mom, I said, trying to control my anger. I don't appreciate being taken for granted like this. A few $1,000s is a lot of money. Did anyone even consider whether I could afford this? Or if I had other plans for my money? Silence hung in the air. Mom looked down at her hands, and Dad stared out the window. Honestly, Ethan, Mom said finally, her voice softer now. We just thought, well, you always come through for us. That stung. They didn't see me as a person with my own financial goals and limitations. They saw me as a reliable source of funds, someone who would always bail them out no matter what. The rest of the weekend was awkward. I felt a distance growing between us, a sense of resentment that I couldn't shake. I left on Sunday afternoon feeling more drained than when I had arrived. Back in my apartment, I couldn't stop thinking about the email. The sheer audacity of it, the casual assumption that I was their personal ATM, felt like a slap in the face. A few days later, I was at work, trying to focus on a particularly complex coding problem, when my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Liam. Hey man, just wanted to confirm you're good with chipping in for the weekend trip. Chloe booked a really nice place. I stared at the text, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I felt a surge of anger, but also a sense of weariness. I had been enabling this behavior for too long. It was time for a change. I took a deep breath and typed out a reply. Liam, I'm not chipping in for the trip. Chloe never discussed it with me, and I can't afford to just spontaneously spend that kind of money. His reply came almost immediately. What? Seriously? Chloe already put it on her credit card. We're all counting on this weekend. That's not my problem, Liam, I texted back. Chloe should have talked to me first. I'm sorry, but I won't be contributing. My phone started ringing. It was Mom. I hesitated for a moment before answering. Ethan, what's going on? Her voice was tight with anger. Liam just told me you're not paying for the trip. Chloe already booked everything. Mom, Chloe never spoke to me about this. I repeated, trying to keep my voice calm. I can't just agree to pay for a weekend getaway without any prior notice. But we were all looking forward to it. she exclaimed. Chloe used her credit card. What are we supposed to do now? Maybe Chloe should have thought about that before making assumptions, I said. I'm not responsible for her impulsive decisions. You're being selfish, Ethan, Mom accused. This is your family. We were all going to spend some quality time together. And I would have loved to, Mom, if I had been included in the planning process, I replied. But I wasn't. I was just expected to foot the bill. The conversation went in circles for a while, with Mom alternating between anger and guilt-tripping. I stood my ground, however, refusing to back down. Eventually, she hung up, her last words a frustrated sigh. Later that day, I received a barrage of texts from Chloe, each one more accusatory than the last. She called me selfish, inconsiderate, and accused me of ruining their family vacation. I didn't reply to any of them. The following weekend came and went. I stayed home, catching up on some work and finally getting around to some long-neglected hobbies. I didn't hear anything from my family. Part of me felt guilty, wondering if I had been too harsh. But another part of me felt a sense of relief, a weight lifted off my shoulders. A few days later, I received a voicemail from my mom. Her tone was different this time, less angry, more resigned. Ethan, she said, her voice sounding tired. We had to cancel the trip. Chloe couldn't afford it on her own, and Liam, well, you know Liam. Anyway, I just wanted to say, we're waiting on that transfer. Your dad's medication is running low. I closed my eyes, a familiar wave of guilt washing over me. The monthly transfer for my parents' expenses was scheduled for the end of the week. I had every intention of sending it, as I always did. But something in her voice, the casual expectation, the immediate pivot from the canceled vacation to their financial needs, rubbed me the wrong way. I thought back to the email, the weekend getaway, the assumption that I would always be there to pick up the pieces. And then I remembered something else, something I had overheard during my visit that weekend, something that had been nagging at the back of my mind. It was the afternoon I was helping Dad in the yard. Mom had been on the phone inside. I had gone back into the house to get a glass of water and had overheard part of her conversation. She had been talking to someone about a sure thing, an investment opportunity that was supposed to yield high returns. She sounded excited, almost giddy. Yes, it's a bit of a risk, she had said. But with Ethan's help, we should be fine. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, assuming she was talking about our usual financial arrangement. But now, in the context of the canceled vacation and her immediate request for the transfer, a suspicion began to form in my mind. Could it be that my parents weren't as financially strapped as they always claimed to be? Could it be that my contributions were not just helping them get by, but were actually funding other, less essential things? The thought gnawed at me. I decided I needed to find out more. The more I thought about it, the more that overheard phone conversation bothered me. My mom had sounded genuinely excited about this investment, and the phrase "with Ethan's help" kept echoing in my mind. It suggested a level of financial security, or at least a plan for it, that didn't quite align with their constant requests for money. I decided to do some digging. It wasn't easy, and it felt a little like I was betraying their trust, but I needed to know the truth. I started subtly, asking my mom casual questions during our phone calls. How's that new neighbor of yours doing? Or, did you and Dad get around to planting those roses? I was trying to gauge if there were any recent purchases or activities that seemed out of sync with their supposed financial struggles. My mom's answers were vague, and she quickly steered the conversation back to their immediate needs, always circling back to the waiting on that transfer reminder. Liam and Chloe remained silent, likely still smarting from my refusal to fund their vacation. A few days later, I decided to take a more direct approach. I knew my parents weren't exactly tech-savvy, and they often left their old financial documents lying around. I planned another visit, this time under the guise of helping Dad with some more yard work. When I arrived, the atmosphere was still a little tense, but they tried to act normal. Liam was out again, and Chloe hadn't made an appearance. I spent the morning with Dad, pulling weeds and trimming bushes. During a break, I casually mentioned the laptop issues from my last visit. Mom said it's running better now, I said. Did you guys manage to figure out that online banking thing? Dad chuckled. Your mother is still a bit wary of it. She prefers her paper statements. That was the opening I was looking for. Oh, really? Where do you usually keep those? I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. Mom, who had just come into the kitchen, pointed towards a dusty filing cabinet in the corner. They're in there, mostly, though your father sometimes leaves them on his desk. Later, while Mom was out grocery shopping and Dad was napping in his recliner, I quietly slipped into his study. It was a small, cluttered room, filled with books and old photographs. I scanned his desk, and sure enough, there was a stack of papers tucked under a pile of magazines. My heart pounded in my chest as I carefully pulled out the top statement. It was from a brokerage firm. My eyes widened as I saw the account balance. It was significantly higher than I had ever imagined my parents having enough to cover their living expenses comfortably for years. There were regular deposits, including what looked like pension payments and Social Security checks. I flipped through the other statements. There were also records of investments, including one that matched the description of the sure thing my mom had mentioned on the phone. It was a substantial amount of money, far more than they had ever let on. A wave of emotions washed over me: shock, disbelief, and then a burning sense of betrayal. They hadn't just been struggling. They had been deliberately misleading me, playing on my guilt and generosity for their own gain. I put the statements back exactly as I had found them, my hands trembling. I felt sick to my stomach. All those years of scrimping and saving, of denying myself things so that I could help them, and it turned out they didn't even need it. When Mom got back from the store, I tried to act normal, but I could feel a coldness settling inside me. I made an excuse to leave early, saying I had a work emergency. The drive home was a blur of anger and hurt. I replayed all the conversations, all the pleas for help, in my mind, seeing them now in a completely different light. They hadn't been desperate. They had been manipulative. Back in my apartment, I went straight to my computer and logged into my bank account. I looked at the recurring monthly transfers to my parents. For years, that money had been automatically deducted from my account, a significant portion of my earnings. I clicked the cancel button. The confirmation message felt like a small act of rebellion, a reclaiming of my own life. The next few days were filled with angry phone calls and text messages from my family. Mom was furious, accusing me of abandoning them in their time of need. Liam chimed in, demanding to know how he was supposed to pay his bills now that the Bank of Ethan was closed. Even Chloe, surprisingly, joined the chorus of complaints, lamenting the fact that she wouldn't be able to afford her essential art supplies. I didn't answer their calls, and I kept my responses to their texts short and direct. I'm no longer able to provide financial support, I wrote. You need to manage your own finances. The accusations escalated. They called me selfish, heartless, and ungrateful. They reminded me of all the sacrifices they had made for me when I was growing up, conveniently forgetting all the sacrifices I had made for them as an adult. One evening, my doorbell rang. I hesitated for a moment, then cautiously opened the door. It was Liam. He looked disheveled and angry. What the hell, Ethan? He demanded, pushing past me into my apartment. Mom is freaking out. Dad's blood pressure is through the roof. How could you just cut us off like that? Liam, I can't do this anymore, I said, my voice firm. I've been supporting you all for years, and I recently discovered that you haven't been entirely honest with me about your financial situation. He scoffed. What are you talking about? I know about the investments, Liam, I said, watching his face pale. I saw the statements. He tried to deny it at first, stammering and making excuses, but I held my ground. I told him about the overheard phone call, about finding the documents, about the overwhelming feeling of being used. The anger drained out of him, replaced by a sheepish look. Look, man, it's not like that, he mumbled. Mom just wanted to have a little security for the future. At my expense? I asked. While I was struggling to save for my own future, while you were expecting me to pay for your vacations. He didn't have an answer for that. We stood in silence for a few moments, the tension thick in the air. What are you going to do? He asked finally, his voice barely a whisper. I'm going to live my own life, Liam, I said. I'm going to focus on my own goals and my own well-being. I can't keep carrying this burden anymore. He nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. I guess I get it, he said, though I wasn't sure he truly did. He left shortly after, the silence in my apartment feeling heavy but also strangely liberating. The following weeks were difficult. There were more phone calls, more guilt trips, even a tearful visit from my mom. But I remained firm. I explained my feelings, my realization that our relationship had become primarily transactional, and my need to establish some boundaries. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I doubted myself, when the ingrained sense of responsibility tugged at my heart. But then I would remember the email about the weekend getaway, the casual assumption that I was their financial safety net, and my resolve would strengthen. Slowly, things started to change. The calls became less frequent. The accusatory texts stopped. There was a silence, a new dynamic in our family that felt both unsettling and necessary. A few months passed. I started focusing on myself, on the things I had put on hold for so long. I enrolled in a photography class, something I had always wanted to do. I started saving more aggressively, finally feeling like my financial future was in my own hands. I even started dating someone, a kind and intelligent woman who saw me for who I was, not just for what I could provide. One evening, I received a letter in the mail. It was from my mom. The handwriting was shaky, and the envelope felt thin. I hesitated before opening it. Inside, the letter was short and to the point. She wrote that they had sold some of their investments and were managing on their own. Liam had finally found a steady job, and Chloe was starting to sell her artwork online. They weren't asking for money. The last paragraph read, "Ethan, we know we hurt you. We took you for granted, and for that, we are truly sorry. We hope that one day, you can forgive us." I read the letter twice, a mix of emotions swirling within me. Relief, sadness, and a glimmer of hope. It wasn't the grand apology I might have once expected, but it felt genuine. I didn't reply immediately. I needed time to process, to think about what I wanted our relationship to look like moving forward. A few weeks later, my phone rang. It was my dad. His voice was hesitant. "Ethan," he said softly, "your mother and I were wondering if you might want to come down for Thanksgiving. Just the four of us." I paused, considering. It wouldn't be easy. There would be awkward moments, unspoken resentments. But it was also an opportunity, a chance to start rebuilding, to redefine our family dynamic. "Yeah, Dad," I said finally. "I think I would like that." It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were still scars, and the road ahead wouldn't be without its bumps. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope. I had finally closed the account, not just the financial one, but the one where I was expected to sacrifice my own well-being for the sake of others. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step towards a healthier, more honest relationship with my family.